It is January 29th, 2021, lesson 90 in A Course in Miracles student workbook, reviews for 79. Let me recognize the problem so it can be solved. 80, let me recognize the problem has been solved. Okay, so I'm not even gonna go through the lesson for today, right? Because what I'm starting to understand is that it doesn't really matter what I give you guys. You are supposed to test it out for yourself. Okay, so whatever knowledge I give you, whether it's through the Bhagavad Gita or the Course in Miracles, the Bible, it's all the same. Okay, what is most important is that you are understanding where I'm at in my path and allowing you to see what I'm doing so you can test it out for yourself. Because if someone, just like most spiritual masters, are trying to tell you things, they make it so simple. Okay, and it may seem like it's not that simple because you go through the process, you're meditating, you're releasing, right? You let go of all these traumas and even the drama that you have about this identity that you created. You start to see that you are the problem, okay? And you start to see how unkind you have been and unloving that you have been to yourself. And sometimes that scares people, right? Because it's painful to see that you've been that mistreating towards yourself. It's almost like you have been neglecting your son or daughter or your pet, and you're like, holy shit, like, what have I been doing all this time? Okay, so when you take that in consideration, then you start to see, okay, everything that I feed myself is going to be very important moving forward, because now you're aware. You can't unlearn what you learned. That's always what it's going to be. Just like when I coach guys, it doesn't matter what you do for the rest of your life, you're always going to understand that you can always be better. You can always be better with your social skills, with your relationships, your communication, being vulnerable, being open, right? You can do so much, and you're always going to have it in the back of your mind. And that's basically the idea of the Matrix, where you take the red pill, right? And you can't go back. You know truth, and that's really what it is. So we most oftentimes are seeking things that are either positive, or we're avoiding negatives, or sometimes we're even seeking the negatives, right? Sometimes we reach out to those individuals that give us that negative reinforcement, that bad relationship. We see the positive reinforcement, where we see individuals that, okay, they light us up and we want to keep that, right? They make us forget about ourselves. And again, we're going through that process of like, okay, like I haven't been taking care of my pets, and that's that person-environment transaction, right? You're not wanting to see that you've been mistreating yourself all this time. So you must understand that you receive what you believe and not what you wish, right? And that's the self-worth. If you want love, you have to feel worthy of it, not just think about it. Whatever you can conceive and believe, you will achieve, okay? And it's very important that you understand that, because that self-worth is going to take you so far in life, no matter what. Because you can think wealthy, but you're going to feel poor. And it isn't until you start feeling it that it becomes your reality, because that's the law of belief, okay? So when we are starting to understand things, we must go through the process of thinking, right? We understand ourselves, and we have to know what we are in relationship to the world. That's our self-plex. What we are, how we do things, why do we do things, who we are in relationship, who do we do this for, right? Ourselves, our community, God. It doesn't matter, okay? Because what is consistent is always going to be true. But we also have these questions so we can know what the process of thinking is, because that's what everything is the mind. Everything is in your mind, and you're creating your reality. So if you have confused this with the mind of what you would call the ego, right, the artificial intelligence, then you are basically looking at this movie from the director's seat, right? It's completely enthralled in it, and seeing yourself as the character, okay? You're not in the audience anymore. You are enthralled and immersed into this movie, and although you are the actor, you are confusing yourself to the character, right? So you don't know what reality really is, right? And that's what most method actors do, right? They just completely go through the whole entire process of believing it so it can be believable to people on the screen. And that's how you get so enthralled, because it feels real. But you've seen like Heath Ledger completely just destroy himself because they don't know what the difference is between reality and fantasy. So when we're looking at the questions that we ask, right, it's very important that you see why you're asking these questions, okay? Because whether it's inhibiting you or helping you, you have to realize that, right? You can't just ask questions just to ask questions, because most people don't even digest the processing of all this information. Some people don't even like thinking. So the fact that you're having this opportunity to have with me is you're a lot further than most people, trust me. So the question itself is the obstacle, right? The mind is the obstacle, the mind is the ego, or it's the enemy, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't really matter. It's all the same thing, okay? And that's what I'm starting to understand, because like I can like read all these lessons and like you guys don't give a fuck. But nonetheless, it's still important, because that's the process of this whole understanding and unveiling of yourself, right? You have to go through these layers and you have to reinforce it, right? That's why you review. So when you start to see that the question, right, is the key, that the obstacle is not the lack of an answer, but the fact that you are misunderstanding the question, right? You understand the question to find your answer, right? That's why you see these Zen stories that the masters rephrase the question and all that. The question, right, is the answer, right? When the question becomes senseless, right? Because you're just like, oh, could you let go of being so smart and allow it to be other than when you think it is? Because again, you're trying to discern. You're using this conscious mind to try to understand, okay, right, this makes sense. If I can do this, I can replicate that, right? And you can't do that. And I'm starting to understand that too, because again, I try to teach by practicing what I preach, by being an example. And you guys have to do it to yourselves, right? I know who I am, but do you, right? And if you don't, then use what I'm using and test it out, because all I'm doing is just deepening my own awareness. Like trust me, I've tested many things to know who I am. So although, you can have like a desired answer, right? You're trying to remove the obstruction with the correct question, right? That's what it represents, right? It is not that you give a question and the right answer. The problem is always going to be separateness, okay? And the solution is always going to be that you must connect yourself back to the source of all knowledge and power and love, okay? So the question understood correctly is the obstruction, okay? So you try to understand the question like, okay, because nothing is new under the sun, right? So the same thing is repeated in many different ways. So there's different styles, just like there's different martial arts, right? You can still win whatever way you want to win, but everybody has their own different style. So it doesn't really matter what philosophy you take. You must understand that if you can't understand the question correctly, right, and that it is the obstruction, then come up with the right question. And how do you do that? You must understand that the right question is the one that the ego does not want you to ask, because that's the one that gets you unstuck, okay? You're looking at the ability to see, okay, like, who am I, right? And you're in a position where you must actually show that and come forth with that with vulnerability, trustworthiness, even the ability to connect with people, because that's how people will trust you. So the one that the ego does not want you is the one that is obstructing you, and that is the one that is really not there, because these obstacles aren't real. These obstacles are just made up, but they feel so real, because everything that you want is on the other side of fear. So these are basically phantoms, or you can call them your shadow demons, right? The things that lurk in the back of your mind, because again, just like with the example that I had, you don't know that you have a problem, right, until it's shown to you, okay? You think, and you don't even know that it's solved until you actually know that you have the problem. Why? Because it isn't until you are aware of it. There's parts of your mind that you aren't aware. It's kind of like the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious mind. The deeper you go, the more aware you become, right? And it becomes less discerning and less discriminating, because now you're starting to see that all this has been created by you, okay? You're the one that is feeding this wolf, this evil wolf. And again, once you start to drop that knowledge, right, you start looking for it and you start doing it properly, okay? Because the problem that doesn't allow you to actually be is that you don't think so. So you don't think it can be so, okay? So these are the limitations that you have imposed on yourselves. That when the masters are speaking, you're just like, well, you know, it's easy for you, master. You're a master, right? But what about us poor mortals? And then the master's like, you are the same as I, right? We are not anything different. You are thinking in that dualistic difference, and that's why you don't allow yourself to actually be, because you are still seeking things outside of yourselves. So again, we start looking at the outside world, right? We are trapped within this house, right? And we have all this garbage within ourselves. And the only way that we can actually free ourselves up is by throwing the garbage out. But we keep seeking outside to have someone throw it out for us, right? But we have to do it for ourselves, rather than understanding that we have been inside our house all this time. We keep seeking outside of ourselves to see if we can find ourselves. We start getting lost and wandering, and that's what wandering is, right? You keep wondering why things don't work because you keep banging your head against the wall and stuff like that, right? You have to see you're not wanting it so you can let go of your not wanting, if that makes sense, okay? We have things that we're pulling away and we're like, oh, I want that, okay? And it makes it very difficult for us to see that our hand has been, pushing away the thing that should be allowing us to actually get closer to our goal, right? We keep questioning things rather than letting the understanding come to us. So we must let that go, right? You must force yourself to confront yourself to see that you have been trying to hold on to this body, right? This body is going to experience what it's going to experience. There's nothing within our control, right? And it shouldn't be a deterrent holding you back and looking out there for it, right? You see with myself, with me, that there's a preparation for someone to do something that I would want them to do. And honestly, if you don't want to do it, you're not going to do it, right? That's not choice. And if you need to do it, that means that you are reluctant and resistant about it too. Even having to do it, if I told you to do it, doesn't allow you to do it, because there's always going to be a resistance. It's not going to allow you to have choice because you're not going to grow. You keep having this resistance, you keep having these limitations and this infrastructure that only allows you to have the resolution that you told yourself that you can only have, right? So if you keep telling yourself that you're going to get rejected by the world, that's what your mind is going to seek, because that is the heat-seeking missile that you have in your mind. So when you start to see that realization occurs when you allow it to happen, right? Let go of wanting it to happen. And it's very important that you don't keep seeking, right, and trying to dig up, because you'll find things, but you'll make meaning out of it, and it makes it very difficult for you to not get personally involved, right? Knowledge is useless if you don't test it out, right? Then you won't believe, right? You won't actually believe because you're just taking it cognitively and intellectually, but it's not allowing you to actually feel it and experience it, and that's the only way that we can actually experience truth. Because I can try to write it just like we did with words, just like the truth and lies in a non-moral sense, right? It can only get so close to truth, and the only way we can understand truth is by experiencing it. So that's really where it comes down to, because again, there is no problem. We must understand the problem has already been solved, okay? Because now we're starting to realize where there was a problem and how that wasn't a problem in the first place.